My name is Hailey Monroe. I'm 27 years old, and this is the most painful and dangerous story I've ever had to tell. I've never shared this with anyone outside my closest circle, but I want you to hear it because it's a story about family, betrayal, and the kind of revenge you can't walk away from once it begins. I grew up believing that family was everything, that blood was thicker than water, but I learned the hard way that sometimes the people you share your last name with can be the very ones who destroy you. 2 years ago, something happened in my family that tore us apart, and it started with one secret, one lie that spiraled into betrayal, humiliation, and loss. What I didn't know at the time was that I'd soon be dragged into a storm so dangerous I'd have no choice but to fight back in ways I never thought I could. This is a true story, and I want you to stay with me until the end because the things I'm about to tell you will shock you. Before we begin, please make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. This story is written and edited by Dark Life Side Diaries. Now, let's begin. The first crack in my perfect family life came on a cold January morning when my father, Benjamin Monroe, was found sitting alone in his study, his face pale, hands shaking, staring at a single sheet of paper like it had burned a hole in his soul. I remember the way he looked at me when I entered, like he'd just seen a ghost, and for the first time in my life I saw fear in his eyes. That paper, as I later found out, was a letter from someone who claimed to know the truth about my mother, Evelyn. I didn't understand it at first because my parents had been married for over 30 years, always presenting themselves as the ideal couple in our small Georgia town. We were the family people envied, two parents deeply in love, three kids who were doing well in life, and a comfortable home. But the letter's accusations shattered that image instantly. It claimed that my mother had been hiding a second family, another man and a child, and that this had been going on for nearly 2 decades. At first, I thought it had to be some sick joke, maybe blackmail, but the problem was my father didn't deny it. He didn't even try. He just sat there staring into space, whispering. I thought I could live with it. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. My mother, of course, denied everything, insisting it was lies meant to destroy us, but cracks were already showing. My older brother Luke started acting cold toward her, avoiding conversations, while my younger sister Emily cried, constantly asking me if Mom was going to leave. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in our home became unbearable. That's when I decided to do something I would later regret. I went looking for the truth myself. Using my background in digital marketing and research, I dug into my mother's past, her old travel records, bank statements, and online traces. What I found made my blood run cold. There was a man, Jonathan Price, living in a nearby county, and there was a boy around my age named Mason who looked so much like my mother. It made me sick to my stomach, but here's the thing, it wasn't just about her having another family. The more I looked, the more I realized there was money involved. My father's business, Monroe & Co. Logistics, had been bleeding funds for years without his knowledge, and every missing dollar traced back to accounts connected to Jonathan Price. When I confronted my mother privately, she broke down, not out of guilt for cheating, but out of fear. She told me that Jonathan wasn't just some affair from her past. He was dangerous. He threatened her, claimed to have leverage that could destroy the Monroes, and had forced her to funnel money to him for years. She said it started as blackmail but had become something darker, something violent. I didn't know whether to believe her or not, but one thing was clear. Jonathan Price had his claws deep into our family, and he wasn't letting go. A week later, things escalated. My father got into a car accident late at night, one that left his vehicle totaled but somehow left him unharmed. The police called it a freak coincidence, but I didn't buy it. That's when Luke came to me, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with rage. He told me he'd been watching Jonathan for weeks and had caught meeting with one of Dad's business rivals. He believed Jonathan was planning to take over the company and ruin us completely. That's when the idea of revenge started brewing, not the kind where you shout or sue or cry for help, but the kind where you dig so deep into someone's life that you become their worst nightmare. Luke and I decided we wouldn't tell Emily or Dad until we had proof, but we'd work together to dismantle Jonathan Price. We started by tracking his movements, his finances, his contacts. We found out he was running an illegal freight operation using Dad's stolen resources, smuggling things I won't even name here, and laundering the profits through shell companies. We also discovered something else. Jonathan's so-called son, Mason, wasn't just some innocent bystander. He was actively helping his father in all of this, following Luke, once sending him threatening texts from a burner phone. We knew we were playing with fire, but there was no going back. Every night I'd lie awake thinking about what Jonathan had done to our family, about the fear in my father's eyes. The cracks in my mother's voice, the tears in Emily's pillow, and I promised myself we'd make him pay. But as we dug deeper, we stumbled across something that changed everything. A hidden storage unit under Mason's name, one that contained files, photos, and recordings that suggested Jonathan wasn't just targeting our family, he had a list other families, other victims. Some had lost everything, others had gone bankrupt, and one name on that list was crossed out entirely, meaning we feared that they were dead. That's when I realized this wasn't just about revenge anymore, this was survival. We needed to take him down before we became the next crossed out name, and so one night Luke and I made a plan that would mark the beginning of the most dangerous chapter of our lives. We were going to break into that storage unit, take everything we could and use it to bring Jonathan down, but we had no idea that the moment we stepped inside, we'd be walking straight into a trap. Luke and I waited until the dead of night to make our move, timing it so the industrial park where Jonathan's storage unit was located would be empty except for the occasional security patrol. We'd planned everything: fake license plates, gloves, hoodies, and a burner phone in case things went south. The lock was tougher than we expected, but Luke's friend, who used to work in repossession, had given us a small toolkit that made quick work of it. The door creaked as it rolled up, revealing a space that smelled like damp concrete and motor oil, lit only by the weak beam of our flashlights. At first glance, it looked like any messy storage unit: dusty boxes, old filing cabinets, a couple of crates, but as we stepped inside, the truth began to unfold in ways that made my stomach twist. The boxes were filled with meticulously organized files on multiple families, including ours: bank records, social security numbers, marriage certificates, and photos taken from hidden angles. There were folders labeled with dates and amounts of money, receipts for wire transfers, and even medical records. It was like Jonathan had built a dossier of every weakness each family had. One entire cabinet was dedicated to my father's company, detailing every financial move, shipment, and contract from the last 5 years. Luke was rifling through a box when he froze, pulling out a small black notebook. "Hailey," he whispered, his voice strained, "you need to see this." The notebook was full of names, some crossed out, some circled with strange symbols next to them. At the very bottom of one page was our family's name underlined twice with a date next to it, just 3 weeks from now. My pulse thundered in my ears. "What does that mean?" I asked, but Luke's jaw tightened. "It means he's planning something, and soon." That's when we heard a faint metallic click from the far side of the unit. We spun around, our flashlights sweeping the shadows, and that's when I saw him. Mason stepping out from behind a stack of crates, holding a crowbar in one hand and a smug smile on his face. "You really thought you could sneak around without us knowing?" he said, his voice dripping with mockery. Luke stepped in front of me instinctively, but Mason didn't flinch. "Dad said you'd come sniffing around eventually. I told him we should deal with you sooner." Before I could process what was happening, the sound of heavy boots echoed outside and a figure stepped into the dim light. Jonathan Price himself. He wasn't the kind of man who needed to raise his voice to be terrifying. His calm, measured tone was worse. "Breaking and entering, stealing. You disappoint me, Hailey. I thought you had more class." My hands shook, but I forced myself to meet his gaze. "You've been destroying families for years. You think we're just going to let you do it to ours?" His smirk deepened. "You think you know the game you're playing, but you don't. And by the time you realize the rules, you'll already have lost." He nodded at Mason, who stepped toward Luke, swinging the crowbar like he meant business. Luke shoved me back, telling me to run, but before I could even move, the sound of sirens blared in the distance. Jonathan's face darkened. "Time to go." He and Mason vanished into the shadows like smoke leaving the storage unit, eerily silent except for my ragged breathing. Luke grabbed my arm and we bolted, tossing the black notebook into my bag before sprinting to the car. The police cars that raced past us clearly weren't there. For us, they were headed deeper into the industrial park, but it still rattled me. We drove in silence for miles until Luke finally spoke. "He's going to know we took it, that book. It's everything." Over the next few days, we pored over the notebook, decoding its symbols and dates. It wasn't just a hit list, it was a schedule. Jonathan had a rotating system of financial sabotage, blackmail, and intimidation for each family, cycling through them like clockwork. The crossed out names? Luke was convinced they were people who'd been handled permanently, but what scared me most was how many of those circled names were people I recognized from town, prominent families who had mysteriously fallen on hard times. The deeper we dug, the more dangerous it felt. We couldn't go to the police, they'd either be bribed, scared off, or worse, and we couldn't tell Dad, who was already in a fragile state, but we also couldn't just wait for Jonathan to make his move. Luke wanted to go after his freight operation directly hidden where it hurt money, but I knew that would only make him retaliate faster. Then something unexpected happened. Emily came to me one night pale and trembling, holding her phone. She'd gotten a text from an unknown number, a picture of her walking home from school, followed by the words, "Tell your sister to stop digging." My heart dropped into my stomach. Jonathan wasn't just coming for the business, he was coming for us. That night, I barely slept. By morning, I'd made a decision. We were going to turn the tables, use Jonathan's own tactics against him. If he could gather dirt on people, so could we. I started reaching out anonymously to some of the names in the notebook, people who had been targeted but survived. Most were too scared to talk, but a few agreed to meet under strict secrecy. Their stories were horrifying: ruined businesses, false criminal charges, families torn apart, but they all had one thing in common. Jonathan underestimated them once they were finished, and that was our opening. One man, a former accountant named Robert Kane, handed me a USB drive filled with documents he'd stolen before. "Jonathan's people destroyed his life. I kept this," he said, "because I knew one day someone would need it to bury him." It was exactly the kind of leverage we needed, but using it would be risky. Jonathan would know it came from someone on the inside, and that would paint a target on our backs bigger than ever. Luke wanted to wait to gather more, but I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. That date in the notebook was getting closer, so we made a pact. 1 week to gather everything we could, then we'd strike. We had no idea that Jonathan had already accelerated his plan. 2 nights later, while Luke was out leading a contact, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, there was silence for a moment, then Jonathan's voice, smooth and cold. "You really should have stayed out of this, Hailey. You've got one last chance. Stop, or I'll send you Emily's necklace in a box." My blood turned to ice. I didn't even know he knew about that necklace. It was something I'd given her years ago. My first instinct was to call Luke, but his phone went straight to voicemail. That's when my worst fear hit me. Jonathan didn't just have eyes on us. He was already making his move. The moment I hung up, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone, and the silence in the house felt suffocating, like the walls themselves were pressing in on me. Emily was in her room upstairs, blissfully unaware of the threat hanging over her, and Luke was still unreachable. My mind was a storm of fear and rage. Jonathan had crossed a line, and if he thought threatening Emily would scare me into submission, he didn't know me at all. I locked every door and window, double-checked the security cameras, and then pulled up the GPS tracker. Luke had insisted we put on each other's phones. After our first run-in with Mason, his signal was moving erratically, stopping and starting on the far side of town near the old freight yard, a place I knew Jonathan's people used as a transfer point. I called him again. Nothing. My gut told me something was wrong, so I grabbed my bag, shoved the black notebook and Robert Kane's USB inside, and slipped my father's old revolver into the side pocket. I hated guns, but this wasn't the time to be squeamish. Before leaving, I knocked on Emily's door and told her to stay inside and lock it not to open for anyone, even me, unless I called with the exact code word we'd made up when we were kids. She looked confused, but nodded, and I forced myself not to let her see how terrified I really was. The drive to the freight yard was a blur of red lights and cold sweat. The place was almost deserted when I arrived, just a few dim overhead lights casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. I spotted Luke's car parked near a row of shipping containers, the driver's side door slightly ajar. My heart pounded as I approached, every instinct screaming at me that this was a trap, but I couldn't leave without knowing. I called out his name softly, the sound barely carrying in the still night air, and then I heard it, a muffled shout coming from inside one of the containers. I rushed over, yanked open the heavy metal door, and there he was, tied to a chair, gagged, and with a nasty cut above his eye. I barely had time to process before a voice drawled from behind me. "You Monroes really are stubborn." I spun around to see Mason leaning casually against another container, flipping a knife in his hand, like this was all some game. "Dad told me to keep you busy until he's done," he said, smirking. "But I'm thinking, maybe I'll just finish you off myself." My fingers itched toward the revolver, but before I could move, 2 more men stepped out from the shadows, both bigger than Mason and definitely armed. They ordered me to drop the bag, and when I hesitated, one of them lunged forward and ripped it from my shoulder, tossing it to Mason. He peeked inside, and his smile widened when he saw the notebook and the USB. "Well, look what we have here. You've been busy." My mind raced. If they got that data back to Jonathan, everything we'd done would be for nothing. I needed a distraction, and fast. I glanced at Luke, who gave me a barely perceptible nod. He had an idea too. In one sharp movement, I pretended to stumble forward, crashing into the man closest to me, he cursed, shoving me back, but the impact knocked his gun hand sideways just long enough for Luke to kick the chair over, sending him sprawling. Chaos erupted. I grabbed the revolver from my pocket and fired a warning shot into the air, the sound deafening in the confined space. The men froze for a split second, and that was all we needed. Luke scrambled to his feet while I aimed at Mason, my hands steady now despite the adrenaline surging through me. Drop it, I ordered. His smirk faltered, but only slightly. You won't shoot me, he said, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. I didn't respond, just took a step closer, the barrel aimed squarely at his chest. Slowly he set the bag down. Luke snatched it up and we backed toward the open yard, but before we could reach the car, headlights flared in the distance and a black SUV roared toward us. Jonathan, he stepped out like he owned the ground beneath him, his expression cool, almost amused. You think you've won something tonight? He said. All you've done is make me angry. I tightened my grip on the gun. You come near my family again and I'll make sure you never see daylight. He chuckled like I'd just told the funniest joke. You don't have the stomach for what it takes to end this, Hailey, but I do. His men began to fan out, cutting off our escape routes, and I realized we were outnumbered and outgunned. That's when Luke did something reckless. He hurled the black notebook into the air, and as everyone's eyes followed it, he grabbed my arm and yelled, "Run!" We bolted toward the far side of the yard, weaving between containers as shouts rang out behind us. Bullets pinged off metal and my lungs burned as we sprinted, finally diving behind a stack of crates near the fence. Luke was breathing hard, his face pale, but he grinned. They'll think we lost the book, he panted. I swapped it earlier, it's a fake, the real one's back at the house. Relief flooded me, but it was short-lived. We still had to get out alive. We waited until the shouts moved farther away, then slipped through a gap in the fence and made it to the car. The ride home was silent except for the sound of my own thoughts screaming at me. Jonathan wasn't going to stop, and now we'd humiliated him. When we got back, I ran upstairs to check on Emily, but her room was empty. Panic clawed at my chest until I found a note on her bed written in shaky handwriting. They said if I go with them, they'll leave you and Luke alone. Don't come after me. My vision blurred with rage and terror. Jonathan had taken my sister, and this time I wasn't going to just defend, we were going to go on the attack. I don't remember sleeping that night, only pacing the living room with the note in my hand until the paper crumpled. The words burned into my brain. Luke sat across from me, silent, the muscles in his jaw twitching every few seconds. We both knew this wasn't a situation we could handle cautiously anymore. Jonathan had made it personal in a way that left no room for compromise. I called every contact we had from the notebook, told them Emily had been taken, and asked for help. Most were too afraid to get involved, but Robert Kane stepped up immediately. I've been waiting for a chance to hit that man where it hurts, he said, his voice low but fierce. Over the next 2 days, we built a plan that was equal parts desperation and precision. Robert's documents included financial access points, offshore accounts, and most importantly, locations of Jonathan's lesser-known properties. One address stood out, an abandoned farmhouse 30 miles out of town, registered under a shell company. Jonathan used to move high-value assets that weren't meant to be found. The more we cross-referenced security footage, the more certain we became that Emily was there. Luke and I armed ourselves not just with my father's revolver, but with a shotgun Robert provided and a set of night vision cameras for scouting. This wasn't going to be a polite negotiation. We were going to walk into Jonathan's world and tear it down from the inside. We left just after sunset, driving without headlights for the last mile, parking in a grove of trees. The farmhouse loomed in the distance, its windows dark, but a faint glow seeped from the cracks in the boarded-up kitchen door. We moved in silence, circling to the back where Luke cut the padlock on a cellar door. Inside, the air was damp and reeked of mildew, but the faint sound of footsteps above kept us moving. We found a set of stairs leading up, and when we reached the top, we saw her, Emily, tied to a chair in the center of the room, her eyes wide but alive. My relief was instant, but it was swallowed by the cold realization that Jonathan was leaning casually against the wall, Mason beside him, both armed. You actually came, Jonathan said almost admiringly. I told Mason you try. Family loyalty is a beautiful weakness. I stepped forward, gun raised. Let her go or this ends here. He tilted his head, his smirk infuriatingly calm. Ends here? Oh, Hailey, this doesn't end until I decide it does. Luke, positioned slightly to my left, was already inching toward Emily, his own weapon trained on Mason. The standoff stretched for seconds that felt like hours until a sudden crash from outside made everyone flinch. Robert's diversion through the front Windows, I saw two of Jonathan's guards rush out thinking they were under attack. That was our cue. I lunged forward, firing a shot that shattered the light fixture above. Jonathan plunging the room into near darkness. Luke tackled Mason while I rushed to Emily, cutting her bonds. Jonathan lunged for me, but I swung the butt of the revolver into his ribs, sending him sprawling. Go! I shouted to Emily, shoving her toward the cellar door, but Jonathan recovered faster than I expected, grabbing me by the hair and slamming me against the wall. Pain exploded in my skull, but I shoved back rage, lending me strength I didn't know I had. In the chaos, Luke managed to get Mason on the ground, pressing the shotgun barrel to his throat. Move. And you're done. Luke snarled. Jonathan froze, breathing hard, his eyes calculating. You think killing me will solve this? He hissed. I pulled the black notebook from my bag, holding it up so he could see. No, but giving this to every family. You've ruined Will. His smirk faltered for the first time, and I knew we'd hit the nerve. We've already copied it, I added. Even if you kill us, it all goes public. That's when Robert's voice came from the doorway, calm and steady. And I'll make sure it reaches the right hands. Jonathan looked between the three of us, then at Mason, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not fear exactly, but the recognition that for once he wasn't in control. This isn't over. He said finally, his voice low, You've made enemies you can't imagine. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a response. We backed out of the room, guns still trained on them, and disappeared into the night with Emily between us. By dawn, we'd sent copies of every file, recording and document to the families and the notebook along with the media. The fallout was immediate. Jonathan's operations crumbled under the weight of public exposure, his accounts frozen, his allies turning on him to save themselves. Mason vanished, and though Jonathan wasn't arrested right away, he'd lost his power. Weeks later, news broke that he'd been found dead in a motel room 2 states away, officially ruled a suicide, though Luke and I both suspected someone from his long list of enemies had helped him along. Emily slowly began to smile again. Dad's company recovered, and Mom, well, she had to live with the wreckage her choices had brought us, but at least we were free. Sometimes I wonder if revenge ever really ends, or if it just leaves you with scars you hide under the surface. But I do know this: when someone tries to destroy your family, you either let them or you fight back with everything you have, and I'll never regret the choice we made. Thanks for staying with me through this story. If you want more real-life stories like this, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one.